I'd like you to tell me what could be done to make your life better. Meanwhile, I think all of our lives could be made better by speaking to Dr. Roger Gievold. He is CEO of Fair Money, personal finance and credit expert, and he joins me now. Dr. Roger, good morning to you.
Good morning, James.
Thank you for joining us this morning here on Talk. It's much appreciated. Meanwhile, apparently you want to tell me an old story, which is arguably a scientific theory.
Well, they say that in a science lab, if you take a frog and you put it in a beaker of water and you turn up the temperature, not too high, but enough to bring it to a boil, if it's low enough, the frog won't notice that it's boiling to death and will eventually expire. It's a gruesome example, but this is actually, I was thinking, how a lot of our legislation works, particularly our tax laws. I'm
pleased that you've moved it away from boiling frogs, because I think that the days at which such experiments would be allowed to be conducted are long gone, Dr. Roger.
Oh, I'm sure they are long gone, but I only mention it because I have a frog in my throat this morning about corporation tax.
Ew.
Nobody's really noticed that the corporation tax jumped from 19% by a third, a huge swinging amount, to 25% on April the 1st. So that means that companies are now paying a vastly greater amount of corporation tax.
And sadly, the whole thing about that, Dr. Roger, is that it was not an April Fool. It was a foolish thing to do on April, but it was not an April Fool.
It was not. It was a foolish thing to do any time. I mean, yes, companies that make profits should certainly pay their fair share. But to introduce this now, in the middle of the worst cost of living crisis, is really a very stupid thing to do, especially coming from Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, who, when he wanted to be prime minister, one of his platform tenets was corporation tax at 12.5%. And yet he's managed to transmogrify himself into the minion of tax-crazed Rishi Sunak by now doubling it to 25%.
When are they going to learn that they need to lower their taxes, simplify the tax system, and also, if they really want to reduce inflation, they could use the tax system to do so in one fell swoop. So there we go. Now, we must move on, Dr. Roger, otherwise we'll run out of time. So let's talk about something that you seem to be puzzled over, which is how a scheme that, I don't know, somebody wants to put in place probably won't work.
Well, there is a scheme part. The second part won't work. I guess the first part will work in, as you say, collecting more tax, more money, more revenue. It's called DRS, the Deposit Return Scheme, and it's going to be adopted throughout the country, throughout the UK. There are some differences, surprise, surprise, between Scotland and the rest of the country, but they will be resolved and the scheme will start. And it's about returning bottles and cans, tins, in which drinks are offered.
So they're offering to put 20% added to the price of bottles and cans of drinks to be refunded when they're returned empty. And I suppose it does take us back to the 1970s when they used to do that. Now, meanwhile, we've got less than a minute to talk about Brexit Schmexit. So what's going on?
Well, I think that people, probably like me, are very confused at this point because there has been this huge explosion of commentary about Brexit with so-called experts on both sides saying it won't work, it didn't work, it was a mistake, it was right, etc. I really find it very difficult, as I'm sure many of our viewers do, to figure out what is what. Did it not work so far because it was so poorly implemented by the government, as some claim, and that they took so long to implement it? Or was it a bad idea from the start? Or do we just need to exercise some good British patience and wait for all the good things to work their way through?
Dr. Roger, it's very simple. It's a brilliant idea. The government need to apply themselves to bring it through to fruition and get on with it. We must leave it there, but thank you very much indeed. That's Dr. Roger Gievold, CEO of Fair Money, personal finance and credit expert. Hopefully, his scientific policies, being puzzled and confused, is now no longer the case, and he's explained everything. Dr. Roger, thank you. Next, we